Chawla, arts educator and Bharatanatyam dancer and disciple of Guru Srimati Geeta Chandranji. I am going to continue with the history of dance. Now, as we study about prehistoric and protohistoric and the types of the treatises, so I am going to continue further with the Purans. All the Purans, particularly early Puran, named as the Agni Puran and Vishnu Dharmottara Puran, contain invaluable sections of poetry, music, dance, painting and drama, alongside the special texts which devote themselves only either music or dance, is Abhinadarpanam by Nandikeshwara. So this text is purely devoted to music or dance. A text is in the 9th century and 10th century. Was also written the commentary on Nāṭyaśāstra by Abhinavgupta. He comments on all sections of the major fundamental texts Nāṭyaśāstra, both from the point of view of philosophy as also from the techniques of the arts. It is significant that this text, written somewhere in Kashmir, travelled to all parts of India. The commentary of Abhinavgupta began a new phase of the evolution of different theories of aesthetic and artistic creation. To the second period, that is from 2nd to 10th century, also belonged the construction of stupas and temples. The railings and the gates of stupas, the outer and the inner walls of the temple, present a multitude of life, comprehending many aspects of the terrestrial world. Among these is the motif of dancer, the dance recital, as also the dancing aspect of gods and goddesses. Most important was the self-conscious attempt to arrest in stone from certain cadence of movement described in the 4th chapter of Nāṭyaśāstra. These are the phases of movement called karanas. As you can see, the karanas of the Gopuram of Chidambaram on your screen right now. So this is the sculpture of a karana. Although early cave sculpture such as the caves of Aurangabad and Ellora clearly exhibited the sculptor technical knowledge of the dance. In Brihadeshwara temple in Tanjore, built in 11th century AD. The first self-conscious attempt to present serially these cadences of movement was made, popularly called as the karanas. These reliefs by the sculptor attempt to capture either the initial or the intermediary or the final moment of a whole cadence of movement. This attempt at carving, sculpturing relief based on descriptions and performance was repeated in other sites, both in South India and in North India. You can see on your screen the dance scene from Sikar. In Tamil Nadu, 3 other major attempts were made to present the karanas. The temples at Sarangapani, eastern and northern Gopuram of Chidambaram and the Gopuram of Tiruvannamalai also belong to 12th, 13th, 14th century. All depict a series of reliefs with inscriptions of the names of the karanas. In North India, an attempt was made in Chittor, in the Kirti Stambha of Chittor. Again, a series of movements have been carved Elsewhere also, the sculpture was inspired by the movements of the dance, both as an impressionistic recreation and as a technical reconstruction. The Odisha temples of Bhubaneswar and even earlier the stupas of Ratnagiri tell us of the preoccupation of the sculptor with the image of dance. You can see on your screen right now the dance panel from Mukteshwar, which is in Bhubaneswar. It's a scene from Mukteshwar temple. And the next you can see on your screen is dancers from Makarand. Men and women, deities, gods and goddesses peep out of inner recesses and stand out in the sunlight on the walls of these temples. Each of these figures, singly and collectively, makes for an overpowering orchestration of movement. The temples of Rajarani, of Parshurameshwara and of Lingaraj all reverberate with music and dance. As you can see on your screen, the sculpture of a dancer from Lingaraj temple in Bhubaneswar. Innumerable figures entwined with trees or pillars, holding birds, standing on animals or dwarfs, smiling or more serious, are depicted in panel after panel on the outer walls of these temples. Looked at closely, one is impressed by the fact that the sculpture was not only a keen observer of movement but was also a self-conscious illustrator of the basic positions, that is, the sthanas and the fundamental movements called the charis, described in Nāṭyaśāstra. The monuments of central India, especially those of Khajuraho, built by Chandelas, Udeshwar of Parmaras belonging to the 11th and 12th centuries, also present a wide array of movement patterns from solo, standing figures to figures in Ardha Mandali to groups and finally to the most impressive series of flying figures. The movement of the dance envelopes these temples. As in Odisha, here also the dancing figure reaches out the spectator from the lowermost panel to the highest lintels from the ground to ceiling. Each is self-contained and yet each is part of the total orchestration of sculptured figure, as if it is a choreography of dance. This orchestration of choreography leaves a staggering impression on the popularity of dance. Innumerable scenes of dance fill the pillars and the torans of stupas, the walls of medieval temple from Rajasthan and Śāstrīya to Odisha, from Kashmir to Karnataka and Kerala, and the larger gopurams of South Indian temples. The platforms of the monuments of Vijayanagaram, of Hampi and of Hazararam temple all bear testimony to sculptures and the painters' innate fascination of movement. These sculptures and painters record in stones and in painting through line and color what no chronicle could record in words. None of this would have been possible or could have been achieved to such a level of excellence had the experience of the dance not been the inner resource. The sculptors and the painters gave form and shape to this deep perception of movement. Indeed, even after the tradition of sculpturing, reliefs on temple walls and paintings on walls and ceilings warned, it continued in miniature painting. Now, the motif of dance finds another expression in the varied schools of Indian miniature painting. Some are inspired by Buddhist texts, others by Jain themes, yet others by Hindu Puranic myth and legends. However, in all illustrations of the Prajnaparamita of Buddhist and the Kalpa Sutra of Jain, two of course the Mrigavati, Akbarnama, Bhagavad Puran and Geet Govind, there is prolific depiction of dance. Sometimes there are solos, as in the case of Trishula, dance in Kalpa Sutra. At other times, there are groups, as in the case of Dasmaskandha of the Bhagavad Puran. At the level of technique, occasionally it is only the painter's expressionistic recreation of dance. At the other times, however, it is highly technical act of notation, as in the case of the marginal figures of several Jain Kalpa Sutra. The second period and the first half of the third period is most important for a dance historian. During this period, the temples and the courts maintained a large number of dancers, and dance was part of the ritual or the seva to the deity. The inscriptions on temple walls of Brihadeshwara or elsewhere, the chronicle ranging from Raja Tarangini to those of Madalapanaji in Odisha, tell us of the traditions of the maintenance of the temple dancers and the care and the thought which was given to support these traditions as part of temple complex. The sculpture and the painting inscriptions records are only one source for reconstructing the history of dance during this period. Beside this, there is a body of critical writing and sizable volume of creative writing which reveals that the art was not only widely practiced and given an important place in society, both within the temple and without, but that there was a highly sophisticated critical appreciation to this art at the level of both theory and practice. Sangīta Ratnākara, Sarangadev monumental treatise on music had set new tone of musical practice. It also includes an exhaustive chapter on dance. This chapter is of vital importance for understanding the tradition of dance as they were followed and as they developed in different parts of India. By and large, the writer follows the Nāṭyaśāstra and occasionally the Abhinadarpanan. However, he provides significant evidence pointing to the fact that while the Nāṭyaśāstra tradition was generally accepted, there were departures and modifications. Among the many new concepts, he introduces the concept of style, which is paddhati, and the movements. He speaks of basic movement under two categories, the pure, which is Shuddha, and the regional variant, which is Desha. Once again, he speaks of the purely classical or the academic form under the label of Shuddha and the regional variant under the head of Desi Paddhati. While Sarangadev was not the first to introduce this concept, he was certainly the first to give it an authoritative sanction. Bhoj, in his Sringara Prakash, and Someshwar in Manasolasa had already spoken of these concepts and had accepted regional styles. The recognition of regional styles contributed greatly to the further development of the individual, distinctive classical styles of various regions. From the 13th century onwards, one can find manuals and dance from practically every region of the country. There is the Nritya Ratnavali of Jai Senapati from Andhra Pradesh, Sangeetopnishad Sarodhara by Vachanacharya Sudhakasala of Gujarat, Hastamuktavali of Assam, Govinda Sangeeta Leela Vilasa from Manipur, Abhinaya Chandrika of Maheshwar Mahapatra from Odisha, Sangeet Damodara of Raghunath from Bengal, Adi Bharatam, Bharatanava and Nritya Adhyay of Sangeeta Makaranda of Tamil Nadu, Balram Bharatam and Hastalakshana Deepika from Kerala, the Nritya Ratna Kosha by Kumbhakarna from Rajasthan, and the Sangeeta Malika of Muhammad Shah from North India. The list is not complete. In fact, it merely gives example from the various regions of India. Even a superficial study of these manuals emphasizes two broad facts. First, that despite regional variations, all schools subscribed to the basic principles of the Nāṭyaśāstra tradition. The dance continued to be divided into Natya and Nritya on one hand, and into Tandava and Lasya on the other. The second is that although they continued to follow these broad principles, many distinctive regional styles evolved, and each region ultimately developed a distinctive vocabulary. The second fact led to the formulation of different classical styles in India. The beginning of the contemporary classical styles, be it Bharatanatyam, Kathakali, Manipuri, Odissi or Kathak, can be traced back to development in the medieval period, roughly dating from 1300 AD to 1800 AD. In content and theme, dance was conditioned by the growth of regional literary traditions, which in turn were influenced by shifts in religious emphasis. Both the Geet Govind and the Sangīta Ratnākara travelled to all parts of India, while the Sangīta Ratnākara reflects changes in the techniques of dance. Jaidev Geet Govind reflects the popularity of the theme in all parts of India. Between the 11th and 12th century AD, there appears to be a very sharp turn towards Vishnu and Krishna. Musical plays for which Karpura Manjari had already prepared the ground were common. They were written in large numbers and were acted in temples and courtyards. Vidyapati wrote a musical play known as Goraksha Vidya, which was widely performed practically in all parts of India. Kirtan, Bhajan, Path, Harikatha were widely held, which provided an immense scope of interpreting the musical world through gestures. As embodied in the songs of the saint poets from all over India, the Vaishnavite tradition provides the various styles of dance with an essential unity. Thematically, many dance styles revolved around Krishna's love story, especially as narrated in the 10th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. In all parts of India, the literary types of musical compositions was not merely an accompaniment. The word was important because it was what was being interpreted through mime. In the abstract portions, different talas and the different patterns of stylized movement evolved. The particular type of stylized movement gave each style a distinguishing character. The different style of classical Indian dance were practiced and perfected by creative artists in different regions, even during periods of political upheaval and lack of social patronage. Family traditions called the Sampradayas grew within these styles. The masters were the repositories of an invaluable oral tradition and as such preserved and nurtured it. They frequently contributed to its growth in spite of the lack of basic education or academic knowledge or unfamiliarity with the Sanskrit language. The British system of education did not recognize the arts as a subject of educational curricula. The generation which went to the schools and colleges founded by British in India in the 19th century was thus isolated from the art tradition of the country. Temple dancing was forbidden, but the devotees of the art continued to practice it in seclusion of their homes. Apparently, the art had died by the 20th century, and what could be seen of it was only a diluted, almost degenerated form of what was known as the North in North and the Sadar in South. It was like a shadow of bygone reality. The recent revival of interest in dance developed as a sign of national pride in the glories of indigenous art and culture helped the development and popularity of our various dance styles. The storehouse was so rich and the layer of dust so weak that the sincere artist had only to dig a little to discover its essential luminosity. Over time, many layers of past artistic glory have been uncovered. The digging continues, and each time one delves deeper, a greater treasure is discovered. The classical dance styles of contemporary India are largely reconstructions of these fragments of antiquity. On one level, they have great antiquity which links them with the past. On the other, they are contemporary and recent, performed outside the traditional and context, each time recreating the past, but are not the past. Sometimes the content is old, but the form and the technique new. At others, new content is infused into an older format. It is a subtle, eclectic approach, seemingly ancient, but in fact an expression of modern sensibility. Now, let us move to the next topic. What is the difference between a Śāstrīya Nritya and Lok Nritya, which is classical art and folk art? As we know, India's cultural heritage is like a flowing river. On one side, we have the classical arts, deeply codified and refined over centuries, and on the other side, the folk arts, which arises from the soil, reflecting the joys, struggles and traditions of common people. Both are important, but they differ in many ways. So, if I speak of origin and tradition, in classical arts, which is rooted in ancient sculptures, codified texts such as Nāṭyaśāstra, and has court traditions and royal patronage. It follows a structured pedagogy passed down through Guru-Śiṣya paramparā. Whereas in folk arts, it emerged naturally from the daily lives, customs and rituals of common people. They are community based and evolved through oral tradition rather than written text. If I speak of the style and structure, the classical has the precision, discipline, highly defined grammar, whereas the folk has more spontaneous actions, simple yet flexible. Now, if I speak of themes, the classical has mythology, epics, spiritual, philosophical concepts, but folk it focuses on daily lives, festivals, harvest, social concerns. If I speak of audience and performance context, so classical is being performed in courts, temple and prestigious cultural platforms, whereas folk art is being performed in villages, fairs, community gathering. If I speak of training and transmission, classical, you have to undergo a rigorous training under Guru, which is for many years. But folk art can be learned informally through community participation. If I speak of music and instruments, classical use refined instruments, whereas folk uses the light instruments like dhol, iktara. If I speak of costume and presentation, classical has very elaborate costume, whereas folk art has simple costumes. With this, I conclude my lecture. Thank you.